So today we're going to talk about winning with the Indian way of management. So when I heard about this topic, I was quite intrigued because it's always been something that's been on my mind that, we kind of rush to always ape what's in the West, but we have a lot from the Gita, from going all the way back, a lot of different skills that we can learn from our own culture. And so today we're with Steve Correa, who is an author and a leading executive coach. Before we proceed, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Sipping Thoughts. Sipping Thoughts is a multi platform media company that was co founded by me, Sukirti Gupta, and by Meeta Gudgutia. It was set up keeping in mind the tagline Real Women, Real Thoughts. We wanted to create a no judgment platform and create a network of women for women, and of course, the men that have supported us. Sipping Thoughts reaches to about 2.5 million women on a monthly basis. We're available on YouTube, we're on WhatsApp, we're on Instagram, we're also on Facebook. Of course, please do check out our website. You will see lots of interesting content there, lots of interesting talks, and I'm sure you'll find something that will interest you. But today we are going to talk about leadership. And is there something such as the Indian boss? Are Indian leaders inherently different? But sometimes are we also afraid to be desi, and therefore we blindly just follow whatever the West tells us that we should be doing, especially from a leadership standpoint? In this session, we will see how we can become better leaders by acting Indian, and how the West can learn from our Indian style of leadership. Steve argues that the Indian leader is multifaceted. A Desi leader is this, that, and more. He draws out the Desi leader and how one should embrace the cultural influences that have shaped our mindset. And of course, we will, as always, focus on some of the issues that women we face as we are rising in our careers. A little bit about Steve. Steve is the author of The Indian Boss, Global Thinking, Acting Indian. He currently works as an independent executive coach and an OD consultant and is a fellow of Sumadhas, the Academy of Human Context. Steve has over 3 decades of corporate experience. Of this, 18 plus years has been as a chief human resource officer with overall responsibility for the HR function. Steve is a graduate from XLRI in PMIR and a dual graduate in commerce and law and a Shivling scholar. So thank you, Steve, and welcome to Sipping Thoughts. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Sukriti. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, Steve, I'd like to delve into this. What made you write this book, The Indian Boss? Because what was it that you were seeing through your experiences that made you think that, yeah, you know what, there is something different out here?
So, Sukriti, I refer to three incidents in my book as to why I wrote the book. Let me share with you one. Back in November 2011, there was an NHRD conference in Bangalore. And like all conferences, there was this global speaker, and he was explaining a leadership praxis. And somebody from the audience, like the audience we have here, raised his hand and said, may I say something? So immediately the speaker stopped. He said, we should have our own Indian leadership style, the Desi style, as you talked about, Sukriti. I don't know why we are blindly aping the West, etc., etc. And there is so much of wisdom which is ancient in our culture. And you know what? The global speaker, he asked if anyone in the crowd would kindly come up on stage and share one leadership concept from India. And at that moment, there was a stunned, as they say, pin drop silence. I looked around. Nobody stood up.
We're scared.
Anyway, to my relief, finally, Sukriti, somebody got up, went on stage. I don't know whether he talked about Chanakya or something or the other, but he said something and he walked away. At that moment, I experienced a moment of epiphany. I realized that my own knowledge of Indian wisdom was very limited. And in the session that I had in the tea break or in the weeks that followed or the months, I found that when I was talking to my co-workers, colleagues, that collectively I sensed that there was a very scant, superficial knowledge of Indianness, though we unconsciously follow it. And at that moment, the penny dropped for me. um, as I say, the ember in the fire blew, and I wanted to then go off on an adventure. And like as you said, there's an ocean of wealth and wisdom. And as I took my what do you call it? The snorkel goggles and dipped into the water. Lo and behold, I saw 7,000 years of a living civilization, and there was so much of treasure undiscovered, some known, some unknown. And I decided that with my snorkeling, 20 yards in the water, I would open up, help help others and myself open up the expanse of Indic wisdom. And there began uh, the book.
Fantastic, fantastic. You've interviewed lots of prominent personalities for your book, so we know what's written in it. So, what were some of the learnings that you were not able to put in the book?
Um, there were, because the book was on the Indian boss at work, uh, the parts that I had to painfully take out from the book, because I had written everything, but I had to take out of the book, were the parts on Indian history. And it was a little of, um for every paragraph I took out, I felt the pain. And the reason I say that, Sukriti, is because our history is distorted, written by foreign eyes, misunderstood in terms of our own inheritance and legacy, and it clearly needs an authentic narrative, which is a gift that we need to give our children and grandchildren, and so therefore this book attempts to put back a bit of history and to allow us to understand our ancient inheritance so that we might bequeath a modern legacy.
Now, my last question before I turn it over to you, and I must say, like that guy, we are all scared. I mean, I know that even though, I mean, I was, of course, raised in the US, whatever, but we are afraid to embrace that Indianness because we think that this leadership concept, all of this stuff is coming from the West. And to be successful, we need to speak very good English. We need to talk like them. We need to walk like them. We need to act like them.
I am not surprised that we are scared. And the scare is a more recent phenomena, not a historical one. I argue in my book that our Indian inferiority of color, race, our own circumstances is something we've recently acquired over 200, 300 years of colonial rule and the last 70 years of a bureaucracy that has emanated from a colonial rule. Remember, for many, many years, up until 1700 AD, India and China were 55% of the world's GDP. A maritime player, warrior of high class, and was exporting wisdom to the world. We are a resurgent nation, not an inferior one or a developing one, and we have to recognize that we have to claim back, as I said, Shruti, our history of understanding the genesis. For example, just to point out, this whole thing about skin color and so on, Varna, and fair and lovely cream. That's something that we only recently acquired an inferiority around it. Otherwise, Varna, dark skin was the badge of our tribe. All our gods, goddesses were all dark folks, and we loved the color black. As one example, and so we have to re-understand the basis of all of these imports that we have, swallowed, assimilated, and for which we need to and that's why when I talk about Indianness, it's really a journey into 7,000 years of going back to Gangotri, joining all the tributaries, and seeing the Ganga where we are and where we wish for it to flow.
I know I said this was my last one, but you evaded my second question. Tell us about some of the people that you spoke with and some of the people that you covered when you were writing this book.
So, as a precursor, I just wanted to say I first wrote the book from my own consciousness, and then I realized maybe there's a bias with just my own writing of what the world is. Then I went and looked for citations, both ethic and emic, to understand whether what I was saying made sense from a research and statistical point of view. And then I went and met with industry stalwarts, people like Harsh Mariwal, Rajiv Memani from EY, Kiran Mazumdar, Naina Kidwai, Javed Habib, Renana Ben from the Seva, and Som Mittal, Ravi Uppal. These are well-known names, and so on. And the whole idea was to check whether this Indianness that I talk about, is it just some concept which is there in the subconscious, or is it a living praxis, either conscious or unconscious, that sort of ends up in the way we work? And whatever we did hear from the leaders, and as you read the spotlights, you will see that there is Indianness writ all over what they say, the way they think, the way they feel, and the way they do is Indianness. And I will argue that across all cultures, the human imperatives are universal, but how people respond to each one of them is actually very, very cultural. So when I also spoke to the leaders, there was a lot of depth in terms of their own personal backgrounds and circumstances. I wish I could have gone deeper into that, but that would have turned into another biography and would have perhaps steered away from the purpose of the book, which was about Indianness and the Indian leader. So that's the part I also sort of edited out.
Perfect. I will now turn it over to you, and we're excited to get started.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And I think it's now 5:12, and I guess I normally take 45 minutes or so. What I'm going to do is really reduce this down to about 20 minutes or 25 minutes talk time. Is that fine, Shukriti? And then open this up for any questions that people may have. Is that fine?
That sounds
Okay.
great.
So let me begin. So to start with, I'm not getting this thing working. Yeah. So out here, if you can see the slide, it's really about the lamp, the diya, and there's a mandala at the back. And the diya in the Indic tradition is all about light that dispels darkness. And for all good occasions, we tend to start with ignorance being dispelled by light. And the mandala is really the whole Indic wisdom of we, the self, being connected with the cosmos or being connected with the larger metaphysical level, which is very, very Indian in terms of its tradition. So with that, while I've referenced my book, I'm merely going to talk about the first initial chapters from the book to bring out three major concepts. To start with, I want to just say that unlike the Western world, where leadership is a destination, for us Indians, it is really a quest. It's a constant quest of discovering leadership. Is therefore a journey and not an end by itself. And it's an inquiry of aniveshiki and how to think and self-control. It's being in that state of inquiry, which is really the Indic wisdom. And we live amidst questions, constantly asking ultimate. And it is often said in our tradition that the most scientific path, the most scientific inquiry is when you finally move away from materialism and into the inquiry of the self. So it is the most glorious scientific journey. Sukriti, you had asked me who all had I met, and I mentioned some of the industry stalwarts. These are some of the names, and I did meet them to confirm the book and what I was saying. And like I said, I used in the book both ethic and emic. Ethic is a lens where the world describes you using certain kinds of filters, like, for example, the Hofstede or Trompenners or the Globe studies. And, they might use paired words and they look at how India comes across in those paired words. Are we masculine or feminine, etc., etc.? or are we more power distance or less power distance, etc., etc. And that kind of a methodology where the whole world is looked at, and therefore India is called the ethic lens. And I looked at ethic lenses, and I also looked at emic lenses. Emic lenses is our own way of looking at ourselves. And there's so many proponents, like from JBV Sinha to Dayal to Durganand, etc., etc. What is our own? And this kind of looking at ourselves is called indigenous psychology. And I ended up studying both the ethic and the emic, which is also there in the literature. And then finally, of course, I took a portfolio of many people to hear their voices, to see whether the Indianness that I referred to, the notions, whether those notions were being actually practiced and has some subconscious working at the level of what they did at the workplace. So what will all of you 35 participants and more who are on this session, what will you get out of this, the time that you spend, the 60 minutes with me? What do I want you to think? I want you to think about Indianness and the 7,000 years of we being the most living civilization, unlike the Indic or the Egyptian or the Byzantine or the Greek that lived and got completed, like the Romans, etc. Our civilization, it continues and is living. So I want you to think about what it means to be Indian. I wanted to feel very proud of being an Indian, from this Kal and from this Desh that you come from, and the syncretic assimilation of truths that it has assimilated, because the Indian belief is that the truth is one, though the wise speak of it in many ways. And I wanted to feel very proud about India's ability to be able to include, synthesize, integrate multiplicity of thoughts and practices. It's inclusivity. Of course, we keep using the word, we are united in our diversity. And what I'd like you to do at the end of the 60 minutes, when the session is complete, I hope, I pray, it is my sincere wish that, like me, that went on a discovery to jump into the ocean of with my snorkel, that you too will take your own snorkel and jump into this vast ocean of Indianness and start to discover your own voyage in terms of personal discovery. 3 words: Shravan, which is about listening to me; Manana is about relating it with your own facts, your own experience, your own lived experience about life; and Nidhi Dhyasana is to be able to really contemplate it deeply with your own experiences and process what I'm trying to say. So I borrowed this from our own ancient wisdom, which comes from the Upanishad, which is to really understand the self, one requires, which is even in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, the last 3 limbs about Dhyan, Dharana, and Samadhi. So this is almost similar in terms of the concentration of the contemplation. So I want for us to be together in this satsang, going deep into understanding what is this whole concept. And for that, I want to talk about 3 words, 3 things in this session. I want to talk about, one is, what is this East and West? Yeah, this East and West that is lying inside you. It's not Turkey and some geography, but we have, like Sukriti, you have inside you an Eastern mind and a Western mind, and both are operating. So a good analogy is like, imagine you are an NCPA theater in Mumbai. The audience is Indian, the actors are Indian, the chairs are Indian, the stage is Indian, but the actors are doing Hamlet, to be or not to be. So what does that mean? It means that we are in a postmodern world, which is essentially masculine in terms of the leadership principles. And we are playing with a background which is 7,000 years of an Indic civilization. So therefore, these 2 forces create, if you like, a dharam sankata, a kind of a polarity, a kind of a tension. And those who manage, if the one thing you want to take away from this session is this one sentence, which is, the ones who are successful leaders are the ones who can integrate the East and West inside them, who can integrate these polarities, these contradictions, these dharam sankatas, these paradoxes, these dilemmas, they are the ones who are effective. The ones who cannot integrate the East and West inside them become the three Shankus. The three Shankus being that, the handsome king who was moving towards heaven and got caught in midair. So what is this East and West that is inside you, Sukriti, and that the two of them, whether they are complemented each other or whether they are in opposite camps. And then I talk about the second idea I want to talk to you about is the idea of Indianness. What is Indianness?
What do people feel is Indianness?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually ask them. So why don't we go with that question? So can all of you on the chat just type the question that Sukriti is asking, which is, when you hear the term Indianness, what are some words that come up for you? Can you type that in the chat box? The time starts now. So empathy, says Sunil Stanley. Thank you for that. Sari and clothing. That's Sukriti. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, is adaptable and agile. That's peace, friendliness, humbleness, inclusivity, fabulous, accepting in different ways, moderate and welcoming. So yes, so that's what we and we'll talk about Indianism further. And continuing, I'll go into the facets of the Indian leader. So keep typing on the chat box for others to see and others to add as I go on. Now, what is East and West? As I said, this is an orientation, an approach, a way of thinking, a way of feeling. It is not a geography. And before I start with going deeper into this East and West, which is inside each one of you, can you please answer on the chat box using capital D or capital S? Do you believe that humans are similar or distinctive? Please just put D or S. Your time starts now. So we've got an equal spray of D's and S, and as always, we'll have some folks type in both. But it seems we've got a slight edge here on the D's. And usually when I've done this for about 15, 20 webinars so far, I get a 65 kind of on D and 30 on an S and another 5 on both. And we don't have a voting sheet here, but it's this basically it leans towards distinctiveness. And so let me share with you my own concept. Universally, human beings have the same challenges, dilemmas, imperatives, etc., etc., etc. But how societies and how nations respond to these imperatives, etc., are cultural. And in the case of India, our Kal, Desh, and Patra influence the way we respond to these universal imperatives. So that's my answer, and that's my research that has been put in the book. Now, let me go on to talking about one very interesting guy called Schopenhauer. He explained this very interesting porcupine dilemma. He said, on a cold, chilly winter night, two porcupines will come together and hang around, and they will stick to each other like how we stick to each other, because they'll get some bodily warmth. But if they stick too much to each other, the spines poke each other and they get hurt. So they figured that maybe a little distance is good. Now tell me, guys, do you think Indians are more sticky or less sticky? Just put M or L on the chat box. Are we more sticky or less sticky? More sticky. Hands on. Absolutely. Bang on. We Indians
capital M.
yeah, we are very sticky. So, for example, we respect affiliation, not privacy. The more the merrier. We like human intimacy. We like our little families, even though our families hurt us. But we'd rather go and be in that little family drama than be alone by ourselves. So basically, what Schopenhauer is saying is the world perhaps can be looked at from the point of view of two kinds of society: the ones who like to be sticky, intimate, and the ones who like to be less sticky, independent. And therefore, you have to now look at, there are some other words socialists use. The words they use are collective versus individualistic. And so India would be therefore more collectivist and less individualistic. But don't get fooled, because among our collectivists also, the individualist is very strong. And I also bring that in the book in terms of how the tonality of the individualist is so cleverly camouflaged. So, for example, I might come to NHRD conference and give bhashan. I'll say I'm doing it for the company, but actually I'm doing it for my reputation. I might work very hard and say I'm earning so much for my family, but actually I'm doing it because of for myself. So don't get fooled that we are only collectivists and we are that kind. Anyway, having said that, I have to move on. So East and West. Now, what is the classwork for you? The classwork is, as I explained, East and West. You ask yourself, are you East on this point or are you West? Is it clear? I'll tell you 8 points and you tell me whether you're East or West.
So E or W, huh?
Your E or W, but you don't write it on the East. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Let's talk about West. The West believe in one good life. That means after you die, you go to eternal heaven. All the Abrahamic religions, the Abrahamic means Judaism, Christianity, Islamic, which have the same base from Abraham, are all having one good life. But in the Eastern thinking, you will keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back, keep till you finally get through nirvana or moksha, blah blah blah. So one good life, and therefore the way we have our music system, ours is in circle. The Western world will have it in a straight line with. So I won't get into that now. So the next one is the I. If you ask one guy with a Western mind, tell me about you, Sukriti. Oh, I am very smart. I am a CQP. I am a good team player. I'm la 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 la. You talk to Bahadur, Ram Bahadur, who has a Eastern mind, and he'll say, I am from this village, I am from this class, I am from this history, I am from this geography, I am married to so and so people, I have this occupation. He constantly surrounds himself with some kind of a apna type of world, some collective clubs. He's part of, and all these various clubs he puts on his sleeve, saying that I am apna. I belong to many of these clubs. Now, are you an I type or a apna type, club type? So that's another way of looking at it. And the third one is that there is this very nice Western mind that is reductionist. They go to the laboratory, they remove everything, they put it in a nice little, for testing, and then they do control groups and they do reductionist positivism. And they look at physical and social objects. And there's an I and me. The I is myself, and the me is constantly moderating how I become a good citizen. But in the Eastern mind, there is I, there is me, and then there is the universe. So we have some green stones and some red stones and horoscopes and metaphysical world. And ours is the only nation, I don't know what that's ours, who say that jo bhi ho raha hai, COVID, everything is all good for us, because they're the reason why it's happening. It's that there's some destiny is there. So we believe in some metaphysical kind of an existence in addition to rowing our own oars, and we believe that some wind is blowing our sails. So this orientation of something blowing our sails is a very metaphysical connotation of a mind. And the last one is parthood, that we tend to look at reductionist and isolated from a scientific perspective, whereas an Eastern mind has what is called synthesis, which it looks at holistic orientation. Ladies and gentlemen, those who are on this call, you decide and put on the chat box. Are you East or West, E or W, or are you both? Or mostly East and less West, or mostly West and then East? All right. So, oh wow, so many of you are saying Eastern, and some are saying both. Now remember, there is a river inside. Okay, there's a 7,000 years river that has flowed, and you might have gotten to the river at let's say Bihar or at Varanasi, but the river has come from 7,000 years, and we'll see how that has influenced some of your shaped your thinking. And then we have a postmodern era, with computers, with 1990 liberalization, though we opened up the world, etc., etc. And we have, we're all trained in English. we've learned Shakespeare, and we end up with Western practices of leadership. So we have got these two processes, primary and auxiliary, and both these processes are working simultaneously inside us. Both of us are working. So, for instance, right now in COVID times, we wonder whether we should, sack a few people so that our PNL can get a bit better, or we wonder then he has worked for my grandfather, he has worked for my father. अरे यार loyalty भी कुछ होता है. So, should I put my boot on his neck and make him work harder, or should I be diplomatic? Should I give all my children the same thing, or give a bat to the child who's more sporty and give milk to the guy who's more studious? Do I look at equality or equitability? So this kind of thinking is an orientation, and I dare say we have, in matters like this, we have a very Indianness kind of a way in which we think, feel, and act. And I've put down in my book several things that make us very Indian. Whether you are Indian in India, or whether you're an Indian who is right now staying at the diaspora outside India, or whether you're a halfie who look Indian but actually feel British. If you are born and brought up in Britain, for example, or an American, so you are actually thinking American, feeling American, but you look like an Indian. So let's call a halfie kind of thing. So anyway, now East, I told you, we are, not one good life, but this whole thing about Trimurti, and you all know what this means. I won't belabor the point. We are relational being like the porcupine. We are very sticky around each other, and we want to eliminate dukkha. The Western mind wants happiness, bungee jumping, get a shot, get another girlfriend, get some more money in the bank, go for a nice adventure. We want to remove dukkha. And deep in our heart, we believe that there is one truth, and the one truth is beyond this world. And we are now running after all this little crazy stuff because there is avidya, there is ignorance. And then we are caught with the kleshas. And kleshas, blah, 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 whatever it means, you go and read Patanjali stuff, which means these are the grips around why we suffer. And so all our chaps, the Mahavir and Jainism and Hinduism and all the other, they all talk about that there is a deeper reality, and it wishes for you to get in touch with that deeper reality and to look at the wholeness, holistic. Okay. So now, for example, this yoga is a big thing abroad. All activity, asana, pranayama, blah, blah, blah. But you know what really yoga is? To still the chitta in the mind and to bring awareness to dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. It is really, to examine the thought, the thinking, and the one who is thinking, who is the thinker. And therefore these postures are nothing but devices.
Can you tell us what is chitta again?
Chitta is really the mind, which has got all of these various thoughts and so on. And if I go, I'll get pulled into something else, which is chitta has got different components of the manas, the buddhi, and the indriyas and the different minds, which is what is explained in the Sankhya philosophy, that there are 24 evolutes. But what I want to say is that in the Western world, there's a belief that the brain gets smarter, then suddenly comes consciousness at the end of the rainbow in the Western world. In the Eastern world, first is consciousness. Prakriti and Purush join in to create the Mahat, to create the Buddhi, create the Ahamkara, creating the Manas, and then from it, all the evolutes of the being. So depends on which school you are from, whether you're from a Western orientation or an Eastern orientation. But it doesn't really matter, because the world, the one part of the world goes towards materialism and discovers the Heisenberg, the uncertainty principle, and the waves, which finally is the uncertain. And there's one world which goes into the uncertain and then ends up in the world which is very certain and materialistic. So East finally meets West, and that proves Rudyard Kipling wrong, which is exactly what my book is about, which is to connect the Howard and the Rishi and bring in a new sphere of the Rajeshri model, a world that celebrates inclusivity and celebrates, the humanity, which is what we need today in this Anthropocene age that we come by. So I won't go into Jiddu Krishnamurti observed as the observer, But today, physics is actually clarifying that the observed is the observed. All right. So moving on, conscious of time, there is this next notion, next box I'm jumping into is what is Indianness. And you guys have already said Indianness is all those 18, 19 words you use, inclusivity, blah, blah, blah. All of that is Indianness. And the fact that you have used so many 20, 30 words is that there is no common word, because you have skyscrapers, you've got slums, you've got the wealthiest people in the world, and you've got the poorest. You've got the most educated, you've got the most illiterate. India has got extremes of both. So Indianness is really about diversity, inclusivity, synthesis, integration, and our ability to assimilate multiplicities. And therefore, you have to think of it in that particular. And anyone who wants one kind of a one word for Indianness will be fundamentally flawed. That's why do not try to grasp Indianness by trying to find one or two headlines for what is Indianness. All right, so I'm now going to jump into my next slide, which is what is about discovering Indianness. Right, so I talked about ethic and emic, and I said that in my book you will find how outsiders look at India and how they describe it. I mean, many people who colonized us actually thought we were half animals, half people, illiterates, and so on. And they didn't understand our literature, and they confused caste systems with race, and karma with some kind of a fatalism and so on. So we were badly misunderstood. That's why I keep talking about the fact that history has been unkind to us, because it wasn't really written by us. Now, let's look at culture. In the Taj, some people got all these staff. They could have easily gone behind the kitchen, opened the door, and ran off. Why didn't they run off? Why didn't they run off? Does guest is God play a part of it? So this Harvard business case is there. There's a movie in that. Go and examine for yourself. What about Indianness made the staff members risk their own lives to stay back? I leave that for you to go and inquire. I've put the research material in my book. The next one, the West talks about literature and it's coming from weird participants. Let me tell you a few things. All the literature is coming from Second World War. Most of them have come from North America and Europe. Most of them are written by males, and mostly are professors in academia. And the participants are weird. They are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Are you saying that the whole world is weird? Where are the feminine principles in the workplace? That's why women have such a hard time in the workplace. And so the indigenous psychology of the West is portrayed as a universal theory, which it is expected that the whole world will benefit. Now tell me, you are taking soils and throwing them in different seeds, and throwing them in different soils, hoping that the seed will work. And it has not worked in many places. In fact, JBP Sinha, TV Rao, many others have found that some of the nonsense that is research that has come from the West has not worked. Achievement orientation creates tremendous amount of disharmony in India. The Oedipus complex that Freud talks about doesn't work. Here we have the maternal enthrallment. Many such instances. So what is actually happening is that the indigenous psychology of the West has started becoming universal psychology for the rest of the world. Will it work? We need to understand our soil, in which the seeds are great, but we need to know our soil. And what is our soil? Our soil is nothing but the Kala, the times, the Desha, and the Patra. Now, what is Patra? Patra is not some competencies or traits. Patra is the three gunas, the temperaments, the basic nature of Indians. Our 7,000 years of Indianness. That is our Patra. Has that been understood? So, like I said, my book is to prove Rudyard Kipling wrong and to integrate the two worlds, because the two worlds have a part to play in the kind of ecology that we wish to bring together. That's why I say this book is about thinking global, acting Indian. Not thinking global means go, as you were saying, Sukriti, in the beginning, let us blindly ape the West. I don't mean global in that sense. I mean global in the sense of being the Everest in thinking about the world is one family, Sangatan, Ahimsa. I mean global in that. In that sense, I mean global. And acting Indian is acting with the integrity of one's Kal, Desh, and Patra. That's what I mean by thinking global, acting Indian. We are a resurgent nation. And unless, apart from these 200-300 years, which we are coming back to being the major operators in the world. Okay, enough said. Now, what do I mean by social character? You read this guy called Yuval, Noah Yuval. He wrote something on some imagined ideas. And actually, many of the ideas have come from this guy called Erich Fromm, who talks about social character. Now, what is Erich Fromm saying? He's basically saying that when you live in any society, there are some stuff from that society which becomes the stuff in your head. So if you live in a society where you have to kill people by putting them on a cross, so that's the stuff. That's the way people die. If in a society you live where you can marry your own siblings, that's the stuff. Now in today's society, we have the stuff which is respect parents, remove your shoes, follow your elders. There's some power distance. That's the stuff we live with. That stuff is called the social character of our country. Maybe years later, we might think euthanasia is a good thing, and that might become a new stuff. And we might think something else is bad stuff. So we remove it. But at this point of time, anything which is dominant, which seems obvious. For example, Shukruti, what is obvious? We think, for example, democracy is obvious. Democracy, come on. Who wouldn't love democracy? Who wants these rulers and these kings and these rajas and monarchs? Who wants those guys? Democracy, everyone has a vote. Who believes capitalism is bullshit? I think capitalism is every underdog can make it in life. Wow. So these words like capitalism, socialism, democracy, these are nice words for the season, and they might change. And so in India, we have the character that creates the Kal of our times. You know, back in the days when the Mahabharata and the Ramayana was written in Ramayana, there used to be one yug. And then there used to be another yug called the Mahabharata, where another yug. And the principles of the Mahabharata kind of Kal and the principles were quite different to the Ramayana principles, if you know what I mean. Because they lived in two different times. So you think of social character like that. For each character, for each time, there'll be a different character. So we are living through a certain character. And that character has to be understood. And then there's a Desha. India has got so much of Desh. For example, I come from Goa. That place used to be constantly under the coast and under the forest. So the whole coastal area, Konkan, was like one character, one Desha. And then there was other parts of India. And so we've got so much. There's nothing called India. When people send money back to India, they don't send money back to India. They send money back to Kerala. They send money back to Bengal. They send money back to Gujarat. They don't send money back to India. They send it back to their Desha. And Desha is a big card in India. And then I talked about Patra already. So I'll move on from Patra. And I have to stop also. And I'll just stop by saying, one minute, so I talked about this Dharam Sankatas and contradictions. So just to say one sentence, that that NCPA theater kind of stuff, where you are doing, you take some actions, and whether you take the action from an Indian mind or an Eastern mind. For example, I'm doing security appraisal. Now, should I write it in the appraisal? And you can get chewed then because it's now formal. Or will I just write meets expectation and then I'll take you aside and say, look, I'm not putting your report. But lady, you have to improve on the following three things. Now, this kind of an Indian way of dealing with the whole issue is how we manage our Indianness. So you all understand. And don't think this is like, Indianness, Westerners with managing the Britishers and managing the Americans. This culture collision is happening in India itself, either inside you, which I just explained through these examples, or when two fellows, one of them Narayan Murthy and Sikka, two cultures, one Eastern, Western come for a big fight, or a Cyrus Mistry versus Ratan Tata. Like this, there are so many cases, where there are two cultures and these two cultures come in clash, and they create the kind of dharam sankata that is required. Okay, I talked about this stuff. There were implications I explained. Aurobindo said this is what India is all about. No time to go into details. Now, what is Indianness? My two paisa on it is Indianness is anything you guys make of it. Whether, whether you're Ladakhi or whether you're Kanyakumari, whether you're from Bengal or whether you're Gujarati, whether you wear sari or wear a skirt, whether you're a Christian or whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Hindu, that is not what makes you Indian. What makes you Indian is what you define as your Indianness. And what does it mean to you to be Indian? Because that's your plurality, that is your essence. India is all about your own definition. Let no one define you. Only allow yourself to be defined by you as to what is your Indian. So enough said on Indianness. I'll come to facets of the Indian leader. And what do I mean by facets? I had not called them traits. Traits are a very Western kind of a nonsensical word. Why nonsensical? Because trait presupposes that you are a noun, not a verb. And that they can reductionist methodology and all these competencies. And see, we are introverted and extroverted. We are sensitive and we are this. We've got feeling, then we've got thinking. We are everything. But to say that, you are an ISTJ, either M, don't get me wrong. Psychometrics is fabulous for people who are amateurs. But if you really want to understand somebody, you have to go into the depth. We are this and that and more, not just some noun. We are being the Atmic self and we are becoming the social self. The being and becoming are constellations through which we go through our lives. More on that in the book, but let me explain through an analogy. Think of this as if you're thinking of Ganga and you are in Gangotri and the water is coming. Now, wherever the slope is very high, the water will go fast. Wherever the banks widen, let's say in Rishikesh, the water will widen. Wherever it meets rocks, it becomes a rapid. When there's a big gap between the water, it will become a waterfall. So, in other words, it is the circumstances that make you what you are. Let some thieves come in the night with knives and guns, you also will become a very violent man. Otherwise, you are like a pandit or a sage, totally believing in ahimsa. We are this and that, and we are more. We are everything. Krishna, he was a warrior, a prince, a lover, a lovely son. He was everything. But come the situation, cometh the man. Cometh the situation, cometh the man. That's why A.R. Ramanujan says human beings in India, we are context sensitive. And that's why for us, our dharma is about context. We have so many types of dharma: kula dharma, apa dharma, for emergencies and stations in life, and what our thing is. And we follow principles, not rule is a rule as in the West. We believe that there is equity, not equality. Ahimsa. Ahimsa is not go and offer your left cheek and say, okay, come on, now you hit me, then I'll give my right cheek. Ahimsa means to defend, to take the sword and defend when there is injustice. Be a Raja, said Bhishma to Yudhishthir. Said Krishna to Arjun, pick up the sword and fight the just war. Ahimsa is not about, giving the left cheek. And we are one of the nations that have talked about the world is one family. If we hurt the trees and hurt the animals, we're going to hurt ourselves. Because there is common sense in seeing the world as a kutum, a parivar. And then, of course, Sangatan Sukta. So I, like a marketing guy, that's my last slide. As a marketing guy, I went and made one slide, which, Supriti said in the beginning, Desi leader. So what is Desi? I use some DESI and I put some words around there just to give it some sense. I could have used many words, but just to make it flow, I put it around Desi leader. So let's take the first one only. DESI, the first one is directive and nurturant. For example, the boss is your dad. Your boss is your dad, because we see dad, he's the karta. We've seen him all our lives in the office. So when we come to the office, we want our dad to be in the office also. We want him to be directive. So what is dad? Dad is directive, aloof, disciplined, strict. His life is a role model. He's also protective. He's caring. He's also a bit aloof. Keeps his emotions a little far off. That's what we want dad to be. I mean, dad doesn't become dad. in the office. Then we make him a union leader, we become children, and we go to mommy, daddy, ma, bap to solve the situation, and we act and therefore all the stuff that happens, and I talk about it in my book, passive aggressions, sibling rivalry, blah, 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 choo-cha with each other. And the poor dad, the boss who wants to be a normal adult, he also swallows the pill of dad and he becomes full-time dad. Women also, they see dad, they become also dad, thakurtas in the office. And it's a terrible situation. And JBP Sinha has written a lovely little article called Nurture and Task Leader, which is basically dad, nurture and task leader. And all this stuff about charismatic leader, in India, I have seen with my own experience, they are actually narcissistic leaders, narcissistic, each one for himself with his charisma. And the laissez-faire leader in India, one has seen that they are absentee landlords. They don't do any work. They're just constantly hiding, not taking decisions. They're not appreciated. And this laissez-faire leader, people suspect them that they don't know the answer. That's why they're becoming laissez-faire and democratic. So the leadership model that works very well in India is the Samtulan leadership of Adhikar and Anurag. Okay, and I have shown this through research. I've explained it through all these. You should talk to Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw when she was talking about Thakurtas, and in the spotlight section, you will see how their Desi Karta style comes through. So like this, I've written the whole book. See, so far I've explained to you only the first 1 or 2 chapters of my book. The full book is on the last slide, which is explaining this whole thing of the Desi leader. So now we've got 9 minutes. Sorry about this. We've got 9 minutes to ask.
Try to quickly take some questions. I know, Swapnil, you've been writing and chatting quite a bit. I would like you to ask. I'm asking you to unmute. And I know Aditi has also asked a question, which I also find very relevant. And Aditi, Swapnil, otherwise I can rephrase. Go ahead, Swapnil.
Okay, hello. So I would like to ask, I've read many times that if we go too much into the process of meditation and trying to get to know ourselves and following all those practices, if we do them without a guru, it sort of can go really wrong for us and can lead to negative consequences. Is that true? Do you know about it? Could you elaborate?
See, there are many people who have different views about having guru or not having a guru. If you look at Jiddu Krishnamurti, he was self-taught, so he doesn't believe in gurus. Others believe that you should have a master that guides you, etc., etc. And I think in anything, one needs the right practice. So when you talk specifically about meditation, this whole process of becoming acutely aware of what thoughts are emerging, what is the thinking that's happening as a process, and the whole subject becoming the object, as in the whole concept of the thinker, and all of this is a process by itself. So meditation again is not just the meditation that comes from sitting in a posture and doing an asana, pranayama, and so on. Meditation can also be being in the flow when you're teaching, like right now, talking to you all. One could be in a meditative state. When you're playing, when you're with your child, when you're reading a book, when you are with friends, these are all meditative states of being in the flow. So so wherever there is this deep kind of a synoptical experience, which I talked about, the Shravana, Manana, and Nidhi Dhyasana. When those pieces happen, there is an aha learning and insight that creates that kind of a moment. And that's why when they say satsang is really about being together and creating this third force, the third force of good and learning and insight. It takes you from your material world to the world of the spiritual. I hope I've answered your question to some extent, yeah?
Aditi, would you like to ask your question?
Hey, thank you so much, Sukirti. And I'd like to thank Sipping Thoughts for this excellent session. Hi, Steve. Phenomenal session, and the way you've linked corporate world and the mythologies, philosophies, as well as the deep-rooted, philosophy of the West as well. You know how the East meets the West is absolutely amazing. So I had just put in some. I was just sort of, also participating in a way, in my own way. So we see a lot of Indian origin leaders now taking over global companies. And a recent example is Sandeep Kataria, right? The Bata. He's here in
I
the.
worked with him in Kimberly Clark. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you did. Okay, perfect. So I have two parts. So one is, do you see a trend? And your book has come in such an apt time, right? Because maybe the Indianness, so called, or the way you've decided, you have deciphered the Desi leader. Maybe those components are leading to this. The fact that they can lead global companies in various cultures, and they can lead that agility, that chaos, that VUCA world, right? So what is your thought on that?
Yeah, agree.
The Indian leaders leading the global pack.
Yeah.
And second is, it'd be great to have some example that you have seen a particular incident. You must have worked with leaders who are Indian as well as non-Indian. And, one incident, if you can probably recall, maybe a funny incident, if you can share with us, how you've seen how an Indian leader and a non-Indian leader kind of treats a particular situation. That would be great to hear
Okay.
from you. These
So I
two
think firstly, there is this illusion that there's some foreign soil that makes the Indian expat flourish. But in India, he's a failure. So going abroad means you'll work harder, etc. Number one. Number two, there is this whole notion that, with the gunpowder, Indian mothers must be feeding something to the Indian children that they become so bright and so smart and so analytical. Both are actually false and nonsense. Let me give you some data points. There is a S&P 500, so obviously there are 500 companies. There are only 19 characters of the 500 who happen to be of Indian origin. They're not Indians. They're Indian origin. And they left India a long time back. For instance, they were double graduates, double distillates. They were engineers and they were MBAs, or they must have gone there to do the MBA. They went through a very arduous H1B kind of a process, got their green card, and then became triple distillate by having the H1B visa. They are educated. The average Indian abroad earns 100,000 US dollars compared to the other migrants from, let's say, Mexico or from other parts of the world, Hispanics and so on. Most of the Indians are graduates and postgraduates compared to the average Joe blogs out there. Most of the Indians come from an affluent kind of a class background, blah, blah, blah. So when they land up in the country like US, they're already taking the elevator and they are already privileged. So obviously they're going to do well there. And just like you have these 19 chaps that you know of, these CEOs, and many other Indians who do well, we've got 1900 CEOs in India who are doing extremely well. 1900. We don't talk about our Suresh of the world and our Sanjeev Mehta of the world. We don't talk about them, but they are 1900. Mr. Ambani, who I work with, Asim Premji, they are world-class players. So don't get caught with this foreign bug and this foreign soil. Then they ask the question, tell me something. These Southeast Asians, Chinese, for example, and others, they're also, similar to Indians. How come they're not making it? So MIT did one study in February 2020. And the MIT found that these guys from Southeast Asia have got something called a bamboo effect. What is bamboo effect? Again, I put some citations in my book. You can read the actual case studies. See, the problem with the good thing about Indians are we're also very assertive and aggressive because all our life we are climbing over boulders and barriers. Every day is a hard day for us. So, this Josh, Jugaad, everything is a common funda for us to. We're constantly facing adversity every day, and solving Jugaad in a nice way, of course. We're being innovative. But if you look at our Southeast Asian counterparts, they tend to be a bit more quieter, more passive. And that's why, the MIT study found that they don't climb as fast as the Indians, though many of them could be as bright. Indians have got very good brains because, our Smriti and our we've got damn good memories. We've got damn good memories. We've got good analytical skills. The time we are small and in our chaddis, in the manner of speaking, we are made to count and do maths and learn things by heart. And that's why we have got a very good analytical skill, but in a janta, in a public, we've got great collective skills. And we believe in family. See, if you look at all the interviews of these ladies, Indrayee Nui, this Nadella, what have they done which is better than the chaps they replaced? They just brought in the family. I mean, they just know people by name. They know them as kutum, as family, parivar. The way they talk, okay, I think that's making a big difference. The Indianness of the family spirit, which in the West they say keep your family at home. You come only with using your head, which is not possible. So now have I explained to you? There's nothing about a foreign soil. Indians have an inherent ability to be adaptable in any situation. We have some core in our private space. Inside our private space is a core, unchangeable nature of our being, which we keep for our family and ourselves. But outside, we are a bear rupia, we are a thali, we are a quiver full of arrows, we are a garam masala, we are everything for everybody. Okay, but deep inside, there's a potency which is very, very strong and very Indian. And that is the nature of Indianness that I want you to discover.
So, last question that I'm going to give myself is, we see a lot of Indian women, especially, struggle because of this mom syndrome, wanting to be like syndrome, wanting to please everybody syndrome. We understand that's a worldwide, but this Indianness of wanting everything to be and wanting to please everyone and putting ourselves second. Do you see that also creeping up in the workplace, and how is that affecting the growth of women?
I'm glad, Sukriti, you brought a gender question in.
Yes, I wanted to bring a gender question. Sorry.
I would recommend, not sorry, I'm very thrilled you brought that in, because in chapter 10 of my book, I have called a chapter Women Shakti, and I refer to, I've done 125 minimum citations on Indian research. There is, of course, research by Catalyst and global stuff, but I've fully focused on Indian research and literature. And what is the literature saying? See, everywhere in the world, everywhere in the world, there is an issue that women face in the workplace. Okay? But in India, it is acute for one reason only, that it is perpetuated in society in addition to the workplace. In many societies, so who's the real devil out here? The real issue is not the nar and the nari. The issue here is not feminine and masculine, is not male and female, is not women and men. The real issue here is a monolithic of a 7,000 years of patriarchy, which has come from Adam and Eve, which has come from Ram and Sita, and which is a patriarchy that has perpetuated. When a woman needs all the systems, in the final analysis, the system fails her when she needs it the most. Coming straight to the workplace, there are innumerable headwinds that women face. First of all, they don't take classes and courses which they believe are very male dominated. So from the very first round, they've eliminated themselves out of the game. When they take classes which are male oriented, they don't get the jobs, and many of them are unemployed right from the graduation campus stage itself. When they land up in the organization, they are not even interviewed properly, and there's the broken rung. When they enter into the workplace, there is a whole labyrinth in terms of given roles which they are either bound to fail, or which may be actually a cliff in which it's too risky. By the time they get to what we think is some glass elevator or the glass ceiling at the end, it's too late. So, Kriti, the problem is not at the glass ceiling. That's what we find at the end when they don't come to the board level. Along the way, and they have a bad time because, see, a woman in the end, her primary responsibility is she's seen as the primary caregiver. Husbands have to be extremely charitable to say my wife earns more than me and my wife's work comes before mine. Okay, so what I have done in the chapter is I have put all the facts at the research of women talking to women, of research coming from data, and I would like for the men and women to read through that and be enlightened. The problem is that by talking about nar and nari, men and women, and social codings of feminine and masculine, we are widening the chasm and creating more problems. So all the CHROs who are talking about, this DNI from a masculine, women are from Venus and men are from Mars, is nonsensical stuff as far as I'm concerned. Because if you really study yin and yang, nar and nari, the principles of masculine and feminine, Gareth Hill, others, we are having both the feminine and the masculine principles. Our gods have got, komal, flowers. Our goddesses have got swords. Women need to be more courageous. Men need to be more feminine. Am I making sense?
Yes,
we need to be
you are.
talking about humanness and human principles, which brings together both the nar and the nari in us. And to be a complete man, you have to be a man, then a woman, and then a complete man. To be a woman, you have to be a woman, then a man, and then a complete woman. And unless you go through that whole stage that Gareth Hill talks about, you are never going to be a complete human. We should be talking about humanness in the workplace rather than this symbolic.
Man, woman.
Yeah.
I
And
agree.
today, a lot of stuff in the organization is just symbolic, tokenism. There is no real action. Let's not call this bullshit, unconscious bias. It's just incompetent leadership. There's no unconscious bias.
Wow, that was a very, very fast 60 minutes. Any last words before we sign off for the evening?
Look, Sukriti, I wrote this book because I wanted to write a book. It was something inside me for the last 10 years. But today, as I speak to various people and I talk about the book, it has caught the imagination of many people, and it has brought a deep desire to know Indianness. I would love for participants to, spread the word and have me invited to other conferences, webinars where I'd love to talk about this subject. You don't have to buy my book, but listen to me for an hour and spread this word, because we have not had the chance to be fully Indian in our lifetime. We owe it to our children and grandchildren that we leave them a strong legacy. Those are my words. That's my wish. That's my desire.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. And we wish you all a very, very good night. And please do check out The Indian Boss and do embrace that Indianness. Whether, I guess that is whatever is you, is what I took away from the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much.